Good morning, everyone. Today is the 9th of May, the second Sunday of the month, when I am scheduled to speak to the Buddhist Temple of Marin and its Sangha. Today is Mother's Day, and also this is Shotsuki Hoyo. So I just want to say that many things have transpired since we last met face to face over a year ago. It looks like the U.S. is finally getting a handle on this COVID-19 virus. And however, we are seeing a horrific upsurge in India, Brazil, and even in Europe. Poor countries in Africa and South America do not have the funds to purchase vaccines, nor do they have the expertise to produce their own vaccines. People in the rural areas, even in this country, have had trouble accessing inoculations. Many are reluctant to be vaccinated for a number of reasons. With the prospect of the quarantine lifting, we can think of mingling with each other, even in-person services, leaving our homes, and even traveling. I was chatting with a neighbor and his wife recently, and he said they were itching to get away anywhere except the United States. He's Vietnamese, and he's wary of the anti-Asian sentiment and violence that is perpetuated on Asian people. Even my daughter, Heather, is wary of us going anywhere. The Japanese American community is no stranger to such hate and discrimination. The community here was rounded up and sent to internment camps. Some people say internment, but others say concentration camps. They lost their homes, businesses, and their farms. My father was forced off his farm on 8th December. I remember living in a makeshift camp for displaced farmers. He and others were eventually allowed to return to take care of their livestock. But eventually, they all, including my father, lost their farms. Looking back to my experience in Hawaii, the prejudice against Japanese was pervasive. We did not feel it too much because our parents shielded us from those attacks. I can go on and talking about the injustices and discrimination and prejudices against the Japanese. But today is Mother's Day, and I want to speak about mothers. I want to speak about two mothers. Ubidi, who encountered the Buddha, and I want to remember my own mother. I hope these stories will surface memories of your mother. The story of Ubidi appears in the Therigatha, verses of elder nuns. The Therigatha is a collection of 73 poems by and of elder nuns spanning a period of roughly 300 years from the late 6th century BCE. The verses were composed in Magdahi, probably the language of the Buddha. And I understand that this language is still spoken in parts of Nepal and northern India. These stories were orally transmitted until they were written down in Pali about 80 BCE. Included in this collection are verses on Mahaprajapati Gautami, the Buddha's aunt and stepmother. You remember that Mahaprajapati was the first female to be ordained in the Buddhist order. Also in this collection are verses by a former sex worker, a wealthy heiress who abandoned her life of pleasure and privilege, and a woman who is trying to dissuade her husband from becoming a monk. The story of Kisagotami and her search for the life-restoring mustard seed also appears in this collection. The Therigatha tells us many things of the lives of women during this early period. Discrimination against women and mothers seems to be prevalent during the Buddha's time in the 6th century BCE. Nonetheless, the Therigatha verses of elder nuns affirms that women to be spiritually on par with men. Of the many narratives and poems in the Therigatha, 5 are women who sought out the Buddha because they lost a child. Among these is Ubidi, a daughter of an eminent family of Sarvasti, who bore a daughter named Jiva. Jiva means alive. You may recall that we visited Sarvasti. I'm not sure if you remember, but there's a large Ananda tree that Ananda planted. But the Buddha spent 25 rainy seasons in Sarvasti. Anyway, getting back to our story of Ubidi, shortly after giving birth to her daughter Jiva, the baby dies. Mourning day after day, Ubidi visited the site where Jiva was cremated. One day, a crowd gathered to listen to the Buddha. Standing on the edge of the crowd, Ubidi left weeping. Noting her deep grief, the Buddha approached and asked why she was weeping. "My daughter is dead. My daughter is dead." Jiva, the Buddha says, "My daughter You cry in the woods. Come to your senses, Ubidi. 84,000 daughters, all named Jiva, have been created in these funeral pyres. For which of them do you grieve? Ubidi responds. He pulled out the arrow so hard to see, embedded in my heart, the grief over my daughter. The arrow is out, my heart is healed of loneliness. I take refuge in the Buddha stage, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Like Kisagotami, Ubiri could not let go of her grief, lodged deep in her heart. Ubiri apparently hid her grief well. 84,000 is a metaphor for countless or many. Acknowledging her grief and perceiving her loneliness, the Buddha asked, which of these countless daughters named Jiva do you mourn for? Every mother who lost a child must anguish as Ubiri anguished. Hearing the Buddha's words, Ubiri was not healed of her grief, but released from her immeasurable loneliness. She understood she is not alone in her suffering. Countless other mothers share the same grief. I am sure Ubiri understood the universality of death, but she was not prepared for the loneliness that accompanied the loss of a child. The poem, of course, is dramatic. These brief verses only hint of the unfathomable sorrow and heart-wrenching loneliness a mother experiences with the loss of a child. I can only imagine what my own mother experienced when she lost a son. In 1947, a year before I entered kindergarten, my younger brother, a few months short of his second birthday, died in a preventable drowning accident. I was too young to understand, but looking back, my mother experienced deep depression. For a whole year, she did not leave the house. I recall she spent her days crocheting. I remember talking with her a lot. I must have been lonely too. Apparently, my parents decided that this was not working out. My mother enrolled in Kapilani Technical School to study baking. For a year, she commuted to school located on Dillingham Boulevard across the street from the Dole Pineapple Cannery. Kapiolani Technical School is now Kapiolani Community College. She and my father carried the grief and guilt for the rest of their lives. Their pain surfaced, but little remarks they made from time to time. We were not in Hawaii when my mother passed away, but it seems that she talked quite a bit to my sister-in-law about my deceased brother. On her deathbed, my sister said to my mother that she will be joining Christy, her name for Chris. Reassured and at ease with this world, my mother joined her son she had lost 44 years earlier. I was not aware of her deep pain. It was well hidden. But she and my father endured and managed to give me and my other 3 siblings their love and energy. Unlike Obidi, my mother did not have the opportunity to meet the Buddha. A normal devotee of the Buddha, I recall my mother speaking and crying in front of the ancestral altar. I lost my mother in 1991, 30 years ago. She was 74. A bit young by today's standards. My mother was a brilliant woman, being described as kuchi hacho and te hacho. Hacho meaning skill. She was a skilled storyteller. She begged her parents to let her attend college. My grandparents were too poor to afford the tuition and needed her to work to supplement the family income. My mother, Kuchi Hacho, was a great storyteller. It was from her I learned the family history, not from my father. She would repeat the family history time and again. Each retelling the story would get better. I came to believe that my ancestors to be larger than life. My mother's storytelling also kindled my interest in Okinawa and its shamanic tradition. She would relate stories of her mother, my grandmother, Oshiro Kiku. My grandmother was a Yuta who possessed the gift of clairvoyance, enabling she to see the future, and clairaudience, enabling her to speak with disembodied spirits. My father always lamented that if his mother-in-law was alive, she would be able to advise him on what stocks to buy. When I was young, I heard many stories from my mother, of course, but also from others of my grandmother's unusual abilities. To be honest, I do not know if these stories are true. I never met my grandmother. After surviving the Battle of Okinawa, she died in 1951. I returned with my mother to observe her one-year memorial service in 1952. I was 9 years old. My mother was good with her hands. She was an accomplished seamstress. She made all our clothes, pants, and shirts. She crocheted, she baked, but most of all, she worked hard, scratching out with my father a life for themselves and for their children. She rallied the community and lobbied City Hall for street lights in Ewa Beach. And she also lobbied the state to establish Pu'uloa Beach Park. Those of you from Hawaii know that Ewa Beach is famous for its ogo, which I used to pick by the bagfuls. I remember her speaking to a neighbor who asked about taking a janitorial position. He was hesitant because of his lowly status. My mother's blunt response, "What's wrong? It's honest money." These are some of her legacies. My mother was quite entrepreneurial, as many Okinawan women are. She was very strict with me and my siblings, except for the youngest, my spoiled younger brother. She was also quite a rascal, a trait she did not let on. When I visited Okinawa, I learned from my cousin that she told her parents that she was going to see the sakura in Naha. The sakura blooms early in Okinawa. Instead, she got on a boat, returned to Hawaii to marry my father. According to my mother, she pleaded with her parents to let her return to Hawaii. Her mother said, "If you want to leave, you must leave in November." It turned out that she boarded the last boat to leave Okinawa. You recall, my grandmother was clairvoyant. She saw the war coming. I hope that your mother or you as a mother did not have to experience the loss of a child like Ubidi and my mother experienced. No mother or father should bury their children. No mother or father should send their son or daughter to war. So today, on 9 May 2021, on a day we honor our mothers, let us remember and honor their sacrifices and their gifts of motherhood. It is through their nurturing that we have become who we are. Finally, I hope your mother, like my mother, is a good storyteller. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu.